Good evening, welcome to this École des modernités lecture. I'm happy to welcome tonight Simone Wille. Thank you, Simone, for joining us. Simone is an art historian. She is currently the Elise Richter Fellow at the Institute of Artistry at the University of Innsbruck in Austria. In her work, Simone Wille examines elements of the aesthetic of art in connection with ideological positions and transcultural exchanges in connection with cultural mobility. She does so most specifically in the context of socialist internationalism, and thereby provides an important model for thinking internationalism beyond North Atlantic narratives. She is the project leader of a project called South Asia and Central Europe, the mobility of artists and artworks between 1947 and 1989. And among publications, I would like to mention André Lotte and his International Students, that was published in 2020, Cold War Art World, South Asian Artists and Artists in Prague, 1947-1989, published in 2025. That's the most recent publication. And she co-edited the volume with Marqués and Yuka Kadoy, Collecting Asian Art, Cultural Politics and Transregional Networks in 20th Century Central Europe. And finally, in collaboration with the National Gallery in Prague, she's currently preparing an exhibition and a publication on Indian post-independence art in Prague. And tonight's lecture is related to that subject. Simone chose to entitle it Postwar Art World and Codes of Affiliations. We'll see what those codes mean. It's subtitled South Asian Artists Shakir Ali, Krishna Reddy and Ram Kumar, and we'll see the specificities of the coming to Paris of those artists, the reasons for their coming and how they interacted here, as well as in their breeding country. Before going into the talk, I would like to say a specific note to Simone. We were discussing before the lecture the time through which we looked at our projects, and it's been quite some years that I'm following what Simone is doing in Austria, the collective research she is gathering, and the very kinship that both programs have together. So I'm very happy to make this connection in Paris and to have the opportunity to engage in a more in-depth dialogue tonight and after, I hope. So thank you again, Simone, for joining for the lecture. I'm very happy to listen to your presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you also to the Giacometti Foundation for inviting me to be here. The honor is on my side because I've been following what you were doing with the program of the École de Modernité. I think since the beginning you started, we talked about it today, 2018, and I've been following that program, and I think it's a really, really important initiative, so I'm really honored to be invited to share some of my research here with you today. So when we look at the trajectories of many artists, South Asian and artists from other regions of the world, when we look at these artists' careers as they unfolded during the post-war era, we recognize that these careers were more often than not characterized by different modes of regional and trans-regional migration. In the South Asian context, regional migration, especially following independence and the brutal partition in 1947, resulted in massive movement of peoples. These migrations thus include flight, relocation, study, and travel, and they intersected with ideological, social, and political codes of affiliation, which had direct bearing on the careers and migratory aesthetics of these artists. I would like to use this presentation today to explore these codes of affiliations through the migration, the practice and experience of the three South Asian artists, Shakir Ali, Ram Kumar, and Krishna Reddy. Their journeys across empire, region, nations, continents, practices, and ideologies in the late 1940s and early 1950s from South Asia to different parts of Europe, including Paris, will serve as a lens through which I view post-war art worlds in relation to migration and codes of affiliation. My use of the notion codes of affiliations draws strongly on the way Indian Marxist historian and social theorist Ranajit Guha defines both affiliations and codes in his important 1998 published text, The Migrant's Time. There, Guha employs the concept to articulate codes of belonging, shaped by temporal and geographical distance, through which he negotiates questions of historical belonging as well as what he terms temporal maladjustment. I understand this notion of maladjustment as translated into the artist's works discussed here as a form of adjustment, enacted through the codes of affiliations they flexibly and selectively experienced, inhabited, maneuvered, and ultimately formulated into their works of art. In my recent book, Cold War Art Worlds, I have explored how some of the artists' affiliations have contributed to an aesthetic of mobility, which is ultimately also an aesthetic of migration. And the book is downloadable as an open access book, so you can purchase it without cost. And some of the images that I can't show you tonight because of copyright issues you will find in the book. So one of the central questions with which I am therefore concerned is how to argue for a post-war artistic experience of modernism in which codes of affiliation are understood as constitutive of modernism itself rather than as merely additive or supplementive phenomena within the larger narrative of art history. Moreover, by focusing on three artists whose affiliations led them to parts of Europe that had been less explored by artists before them, I suggest attending to the sense of futures that these artists believed they were entering, the futures that they believed were imminent and achievable. So let me try and unpack this argument by first introducing the artists. I've written about each of these artists, of these three artists individually in the past. However, this is the first occasion on which I bring them together within a single narrative framework. It remains to be seen where this constellation will lead, and I look forward to our discussion later in your comments, hopefully. I begin with Shakir Ali, as his journey from South Asia to Europe is the earliest among the three. So this is a map of the time that Shakir Ali began his artistic career in colonial South Asia. And I'm not very good at drawing lines into maps, so it's a very basic drawing, but it starts from, northern India. Rampur is slightly north of Delhi. This is where he was born. Then he was schooled he had his first artistic teaching in Delhi, and then he moved to Bombay, which is now Mumbai. So Shakir Ali originally is from northern India, from Rampur. he first took art classes in Delhi with the Ukil brothers Sarada and Parada. They were known for teaching a Bengal school style characterized by sentimental and romantic stylization of local traditions, often executed in the famous Bengal wash technique, but also in tempera, right? Tempera painting. I'm showing you here a well-known work of art by Abanindranath Tagore, whose early use of the wash technique became a hallmark of the Bengal school style. Bharat Mata is considered the first nationalist painting because of its portrayal of the mother as an ascetic, as Patamita suggests, although Tagore models her on a middle-class Bengali woman. The wash technique allowed the artists to achieve a tonally softened, even veiled orange-grey background. Patamita views this as a rare political statement, not least because Tagore substitutes the conventional attributes of a Hindu deity with objects that refer to national self-reliance. The sheaves of rice stand for food, the white cloth for clothing, the palm leaf manuscript for secular knowledge, and the prayer beads for spiritual knowledge. And you can see this by the four arms, right? In 1938, back to Shakir Ali now, in 1938, Shakir Ali joined the colonial art school known as the Sir Jamsiji Gigi Boys School of Art in Bombay. He spent 7 years in Bombay at the JJ School of Art, the first 6 years as a student, and the final year as a fellow. During this period, he was associated with the left-leaning literary and cultural movement of the All India Progressive Writers Association, which promoted socially engaged and politically conscious cultural production. The few surviving works by Ali from this period reflect the curriculum of the art school, which included basic compositional principles, and here you see an early work by Shakir Ali, which is not unlike many of the works documented in the JJ School's archive from that time. It is characterized by a flattened narrative style in gouache technique, which allows for a thin as well as a thick application process on paper. The subject of this work is linked to the Bahari miniature school, with a likely reference to the story of Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana in exile. This work is also representative of the kind of modernism promoted within the colonial art school, which resulted in frustration with many artists who aspired to a career as an artist rather than an artisan or a commercial designer. For Shakir Ali, therefore, an important framework of engagement and a form of affiliation, if you like, within a discursive field outside the art school was the literary circle of the All India Progressive Writers Association. Many of his subsequent political activities and ideological affiliations, especially in London and in Prague, can be traced back to his leftist political outlook, which took shape in late colonial Bombay. Okay, so Shakir Ali applied for scholarship with the Slade School of Fine Art in London. He joined the Slade in January 1947. Remember 1947, January. At that time, India was still a colony. Ali joined the Slade as a colonial subject. As we will see soon, by the time he left London in 1949, he left as a citizen of the newly created Pakistan. The decision to become a Pakistani citizen, however, was made in Prague. I will come to this episode of his life in a moment. Just keep it in mind. What's significant about Shakir Ali's time in London is that he moved addresses several times. These changes of changing addresses show up repeatedly in archival records, two of which I'm showing here, and they offer material traces of his movement and social positioning during this period. In a letter he wrote to André Lhote in 1948, and you see the letter reprinted here to the right, yet another address appears. And I'll come back to Ali's connection to André Lhote shortly. One of these addresses, which you see here, the Student Movement House at 103 Gower Street, was known as a meeting place for students of color in London and a site that attracted left-leaning activists. This context allows us to suggest political and social affiliations, especially since Ali was part of a group of South Asian students who traveled from London to Prague to take part in the first World Youth Festival in August 1947. We remember the date, August 1947. The event has been described by historian Joël Kotek as a crossroads event for young idealists of the world, and historian Pia Koivunen argues that it became a space for transnational encounter. For the Indian artist Shakir Ali, the World Youth Festival coincided with the actual end of colonialism in India. Thus, on August 15, 1947, as the artist stated in an interview with a Czechoslovak journal many years later, he marched, and I think this image represents this marching quite well. In my book, you have further images of this festival. They're quite amazing, these images. So he stated that he marched with fellow South Asian students in front of the Czechoslovak parliament to celebrate independence from British colonial rule, along with the creation of the independent state of Pakistan. All of that on 15th of August, 1947. So a lot of coincidences. As a Muslim South Asian, thousands of miles away from South Asia, he decided to become a Pakistani citizen in Prague on the day of the partition of South Asia. So in the book, you'll see images of groups of South Asian students carrying the Indian flag. We don't see Shakir Ali in these images, but I imagine that he's part of this group, marching behind the Indian flag and then separating from this group. And as he states, he made his own Pakistani flag out of, imaginary ideas that he had about this flag. So he states in an interview, so I quote him saying, "I'm quite proud to have been the first citizen of Pakistan to unfurl the Pakistan flag in Prague. Naturally, at that time, I had no idea what the flag of our nation state would look like, so I simply made a little green flag of the Muslim League with a white crescent and star. It was with this that I waved in front of the Czechoslovak parliament when I and other students from India celebrated the liberation of our country from British domination." The process of decolonization for Shakir Ali was accompanied by a series of relational networks with which he affiliated himself and which, in turn, also shaped his position. Between colonial India and imperial London, the artist may have perceived more similarities than differences. Prague, by contrast, signaled something new, something exciting, to which he turned precisely because it offered a sense of the present. In the words of Ranajit Guha, This allowed him to belong, to be with others in a shared time, and possibly for the first time that he had this experience in Prague. As a migrant, Ali experienced distance not only from his homeland, but also from his host community. Against this backdrop, the search for a space in which shared time could be experienced collectively became crucial. It is in this context that Ranajit Guha's reflections become particularly resonant. Let me quote from Guha the following. I quote, "Ousted temporally no less than spatially, he means the migrant, will henceforth be adrift until he lands in a second world where his place will seek and hopefully find matching coordinates again in a time he, like others, should be able to claim as our time," end quote. The singular experience with the first Prague Youth Festival offered a collective, temporalized experience. Shakir Ali returned to London after this first Prague experience, and he would later go back to live in Prague for a year. Yet before he returned to Prague, he joined André Lotte's Field Academy, l'Académie aux Champs, in Gordes, in the Vaucluse, in the south of France, in the summer of 1948. And you see here a photograph from the Archive André Lotte, which could possibly be either Mirmande or Gordes. We're not quite sure, but it represents this atmosphere that Shakir Ali would experience in the south of France. So this is in the Drôme region. If it's Mirmande, it would be in the Drôme, but we don't quite know. It could be Gordes as well. So the kind of art training and practice offered by Lotte must have come as a welcome change for Shakir Ali. Apart from the difference in climate, for sure, between London and the south of France, Lotte was known for his structured and reasoned approach to modernism, where the past was not seen as an obstacle, but as a base upon which to build. Lotte's attempt to reconcile tradition with modernity was a lived reality that took shape through his endeavor to restore small French villages in the south of France, where he very strategically set up his field academies. The environment that Lotte created was informal and familiar, one in which the teacher perceived himself as engaged in a constant process of learning through and engaging with those who came to study with him. The following note by Lotte testifies to this attitude, and I'm reading from the last section of this note. I translated it into English. "I would be ungrateful," Lotte says, "if I did not add that of all these students, I'm the one who learns the most. Indeed, through constant tackling in the company of these charming companions, the most diverse pictorial problems, through continually reworking the most varied works, I have been obliged to explore the full range of all possible pictorial techniques. I owe a great deal to those whom I teach, which is why I was tempted earlier to call them my collaborators. If one were to ask me one day why I teach," Lotte says, "I could answer without hesitation, in order to learn better." So what Shakir Ali took away from his participation at André Lotte's Field Academy is an approach to pictorial composition not based on copying, as it was practiced in the colonial art school, but rather on observational practice with principles related to order, method, figure, and form. This was an important component of Lotte's teaching method. In a photograph taken by Villeroni in Gordes in 1948, we see Shakir Ali and André Lotte standing next to an easel with a landscape painting in front of a small group turned towards them. This photograph shows a smiling group of people of different ages, female and male, casually attired in a room flooded with light. The photograph was taken by Willy Rony, who, together with his wife, the artist Marie-Anne Lanziot, had bought a house in Gordes around this time. In this photograph, all eyes are on Lot, who speaks to the group. The landscape painting being discussed could be Shakir Ali's, as he is standing next to it, smiling. The light that enters the room gently, most likely through an open window, creates an atmosphere that recalls Nu Provençal, the famous photograph by Willy Rony in 1949 of Marie-Anne Lanziot in their house in Gordes. What these photographs capture more than anything else is the easy feeling of Provençal life, something that must have attracted Shakir Ali. When Lot spoke to his students about the coherent organization of their compositions, he often referred to the geometrical laws applied by masters such as Cézanne and others. His analytical gaze was also turned to ancient Egyptian art, however, which he regarded as a precursor to Cubist art. The landscape painting with a battle scene, a painting of Indian origin, which we see in Willy Rony's photo placed on the wall behind Shakir Ali and André Lot. You see it here on the wall, right? Is further evidence of Lot's interest in Indian art. Lot's various cultural interests are therefore based on his curiosity about the structures of pictorial compositions as they appear across cultures. He turned to European art and to the old masters, but he also looked beyond geographies of nation and culture. For Shakir Ali, the experience at Lot's Field Academy in Gordes was a time filled with study and producing work, but perhaps even more, it was an experience of a different style of life, based on a geographically decentered and non-hierarchically organized infrastructure or setting, the setting being the Field Academy. For Shakir Ali, this marks a moment when he experienced the difference between what scholars Sanjukta Sundaresan and Lotte Höck called, quote, the hierarchized spatial politics that existed between South Asia and Britain, end quote, and an environment that offered itself as an alternative, one in which the priority was the collective effort to produce modernist paintings, nothing else. The location of Lot's Field Academy, peripheral in a geographical sense, but nevertheless part of the established infrastructures of modernism through Lot's own involvement, as well as through those who came to participate, opened up an alternative route and vision for Shakir Ali, one that lay off the beaten track of East-West connections, of colony and metropolitan center. So after Gordes, Ali returned to London, from where he moved on to Prague, equipped with a scholarship to study textile design at Umprum, the Academy of Arts, Architecture and Design. He stayed in Prague for approximately 1 year, from September 1948 until December 1949. His affiliations in Prague included the Czech artists Emil Filler and Alois Fischerek at Umprum. They were his teachers. In Prague, he also met his future wife, Marie Petranova, who accompanied him when the two left Prague to live in Pakistan in 1950-51. As little to no work survives from his Prague time, I consulted various archives in the city to gain an insight into this crucial and formative period of this artist's life. It turns out that both Marie Petranova and Shakir Ali were under constant surveillance by the former secret police, who viewed them with suspicion but regarded them, Shakir Ali more than Petranova, as potential collaborators. Now just remember the late 1940s, the time that Shakir Ali was in Prague was Stalinist time, so high Stalinist time. Every foreigner would have been surveyed by the secret police. By the time the couple had left Prague, and in my book you have photographs of the couple, which I can't show you here, but if you're interested, have a look. So by the time the couple had left Prague and journeyed back to Pakistan by boat, by the time they arrived at the port in Karachi, they were not only courted by the communists, but also by American and British agents, which suggests that the Cold War clearly followed them in the form of a shadow. According to Salima Hashmi, Shakir Ali's first solo exhibition in Lahore was visited by Pakistan's own Central Investigation Department, who inquired with suspicion about his modernist work of art and asked whether he was sending secret messages to the communists through his art. In the face of this split reality, which it really was, exacerbated by various intelligence, surveillances, and suspicions, the line between reality and abstractions, and that brings us back to painting, reality and abstraction, is by no means clear-cut. Given this scenario, the works of art and practices of Shakir Ali and of many of his contemporaries must indeed be situated at the intersections of ideological, social, and political codes of affiliation. Okay, here I'm missing one slide. And you should be seeing the work that appears on the announcement of the... It just disappeared. The work that appears on the announcement of my talk today. Can you please imagine it? The birds? We don't have a book here either, so it has disappeared. Then let's stick with this one. I have an empty slide. So it somehow disappeared. So I'm talking about the blue, the birds in flight and flowers, the blue one. Please imagine it, okay? Collectively, we imagine it. The painting, which the Giacometti Foundation used to announce this talk of mine today, and which also appears on the cover of my book, which we all visualize now, is an apt example of how the artist set out to symbolically unite elements that speak of his experiences, of his trans-regional journey. The imagery of the birds suggests freedom, justice, and the artist's journey. The work is, above all, characterized by the movement and group dynamics of the bird migration. The movement of the flock of birds extends across the canvas. And you have to believe me, just follow what I'm saying, maybe it helps you to visualize it. So across the canvas, the birds move, and across a vertically drawn strip, which appears on the right-hand side of the painting. So you have the birds moving across. It's a large painting. It's almost 5 meters long, right? So the birds migrate from left to right, and they cross a strip of something. There is a barrier or something they cross, right? The artist was particularly inspired by the writings of Rainer Maria Rilke, whose magical sense of space, where nothing is static and where the writer is not the observer so much as the participant, can be seen as inspirational here. Shakir Ali echoed Rilke's ideas of inner space, movement, and the material world, but he also reflected on the Czech communist writer Julius Fučík and his book Notes from the Gallows, written in prison where he was tortured and executed by the Nazis in 1943. So we have two opposing literary references, the modernist writer Rainer Maria Rilke and Julius Fučík, the communist writer who was tortured and killed in 1943 in Prague. The fact that the birds move from left to right, I read it as west to east, and from bottom to top, which I read as south to north, can be understood as indicating directions related to the artist's own experiences, right? The movement of the birds across the canvas, however, addresses not only geography, but also time. This reading, if we follow this reading, which I propose here, this reading allows for a decentralized understanding of modernism that cannot be tied either to national borders or to any of the traditional modernist centers of the mid-20th century. Birds in Flight and Flowers is therefore an exemplary work that speaks of experiences situated at the crossroads of mid-century modernism, with Bombay, London, Gordes, and Prague, and Lahore as pivotal sites. Shakir Ali's mobility and the different codes of affiliation that shaped his journey across empire, nations, continents, and ideologies does have a direct bearing on his migratory aesthetic. So let me now introduce Krishna Reddy and the kinds of affiliations that underpinned his journey and migration from India to Europe. Krishna Reddy's formation as an artist in late colonial India began at Rabindranath Tagore's Visva Bharati World University and its art school Kala Bhavana in Shantiniketan. Shantiniketan is a 3-hour train journey north to Calcutta. At Shantiniketan, art making was conceived and taught as an expanded idea, experimental and rural. Scholars have emphasized the non-conformist experiment with education, the prevailing informality, and importantly, Tagore's belief that contact with other cultures was necessary, sustaining creative vitality. What you see here are photographs of how art classes are traditionally taking place outside the classroom, under these massive trees, which provide shade. Then, when it was created in 1922, and still today. Shantiniketan was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2023. From 1950 to 1952, Krishna Reddy was at the Slade School of Fine Art in London, and subsequently in Paris at the Académie de la Grande Chaumière, where he participated in Ossip Zatkin's highly structured form-oriental sculpture classes. Upon Zatkin's initiative, Reddy moved to Stanley William Hayter's Atelier Cette, where he remained until the mid-1970s. The encounter with the informal workshop setting at Atelier Cette, the openness to experimentation, so maybe at some point probably Shakir Ali's painting pops up, possible. So the openness, the informal workshop setting at Atelier Cette, the openness to experimentation, the familiar environment where the emphasis lay on collaboration and process rather than on results, suited Krishna Reddy. At Atelier Cette, Reddy was instrumental in developing exceptional results in multicolored viscosity printmaking, for which Hayter preferred the term simultaneous color printing. This technical achievement was produced by carefully superimposing colors of different viscosities at differently etched levels, thereby avoiding an undesired mixing of colors. In a work such as Water Lilies, the technique is visible in the lines, shapes, and colors which define the grid-like structure expanding across the surface. I'll come back to this work a little bit later. When Reddy moved to Atelier Cette, the potential of graphic art was on the rise, not least through new international alliances and cultural configurations. Early 1950s, right? Against the backdrop of the aesthetic and political battles of the Cold War, in which the contested terrain of the fine arts became the real, printmaking gained value as a medium. One reason for this was that its practitioners could exercise stylistic experimentation through method and technique. So the focus was less on form, but the focus was on technique and method, which allowed a lot of people, a lot of artists to sort of not engage with the question of the real and the abstract, right? And this is where Ljubljana comes to play a role. With the establishment of the Biennial of Graphic Arts in 1955, Ljubljana positioned itself as an international and a central reference point for showcasing the latest artistic and technical developments in printmaking. At this point, graphic art came to play an important role vis-à-vis painting, I suggest. The latter dominated the North Atlantic art world, while the former, as witnessed with this biennial in Yugoslavia, acted to bridge the two sides of the Cold War. The central idea behind the establishment of the Biennial of Graphic Arts in Ljubljana in 1955 was the quest to forge connections, a principle demonstrated from the beginning by exhibiting, to use Bojana Biskur's, curator in Ljubljana, Bojana Biskur's formulation, quote, basically everything, the whole world, end quote. So despite criticism that contributions from so-called third world countries, which increased after the formal formation of the non-aligned movement in 1961, were virtually always hung in the basement of this building in less prestigious exhibition rooms, the Ljubljana Biennial of Graphic Arts was very much a non-block art event at the time when the Cold War created clear-cut divisions, seemingly clear-cut divisions, right? It became a focal point, a site of contact for an interested and specialized international audience, and international curators, artists, and museum directors were often invited to visit the Biennale. Eventually, this led to a global dissemination of many of the exhibited works. The central role that Ljubljana came to play through the biennial created opportunities for artists to travel to the region. Geographically, not unlike Prague, if you like, Ljubljana was located on the periphery of Europe. Through its role with the non-aligned movement, Yugoslavia became an important site for artists globally in the 1950s already, before the movement was officially established, and that's because of the Biennale. Atelier Cette artists' works were included in the Ljubljana Biennial from the beginning. So was Krishna Reddy's work, and the work of his first wife, Shirley Vitebsky, whom he met at Atelier Cette. Reddy's work was recognized in Ljubljana for its innovative artistic achievements, which, as Hayter put it, distinguishes his works from all of the artists using the simultaneous method. Yes, Lot was also there. I noticed that you noticed. What is striking about the works of the artists displayed at the first editions of the biennial in Ljubljana is their interplay of non-representation and representation, so the real versus the abstract. This reflects the organizers' intention to present a variety of stylistic concepts and approaches to highlight printmaking as a medium and to extend the geographic map of the exhibiting countries. Works by artists associated with the École de Paris filled large segments of the first editions of the biennial. In the summer of 1961, Zoran Kršišnik, the longtime director of the Moderna Galleria in Ljubljana, who was instrumental in setting up and directing the biennial, helped organize a trip for Reddy and Vitebsky to the region, at the end of which the couple prepared Reddy's solo exhibition at the Malagalleria in Ljubljana. Several letters survive from an exchange between Reddy and Krzyznik and the then curator of Moderna Galeria, Majda Jerman. Moreover, the artists' couple's stay coincided with several significant events in art history and politics. It's not unlike Shakir Ali's experience in Prague in 1947. 1961, there were also several historical important moments. Across the sea in Venice, Reddy's work was shown in an exhibition at Galleria 22 Marzo, which appears to have been a two-person show together with sculptural works by Patricia Diska. Back in Yugoslavia, and here again one of my not-so-good maps, but just to give you an idea how close these places are to each other, right? You have Venice here across the sea, you have Porto Roche, which is where Reddy and Vitebsky hung out, because I'll come to this in a moment. The first sculpture symposium happened there, and then you have here Ljubljana. So it's all really close, but I mean, it was Yugoslavia, right? Politically, it was a different situation. So back in Yugoslavia, where in 1961, remember, that summer, near Porto Roche, which is here, the local artists Janez Lenassi and Jakub Savincek held the first edition of Forma Viva, a sculpture symposium. In a letter to Majda Jerman, Reddy spoke about his and his wife's meeting with local artists in Porto Roche, which allows us to assume that they connected with the sculptors who had gathered for the first Forma Viva meeting. On the political level, during the summer of 1961, Yugoslavia was busy with preparations for a conference that was held from September 1 to 6 in Belgrade, which subsequently led to the establishment of the non-aligned movement. So this is important. Artistic exchanges between non-aligned movement member states increased thereafter, and this was of major political value for the organizers of exhibitions across Yugoslavia. Reddy's solo exhibition at Malagalleria in Ljubljana thus happened at a time of important historical transition. The exhibition in Ljubljana, I don't have a catalogue of it, I only have literary exchange, so I can't show you a catalogue. The exhibition in Ljubljana, which opened on September 29, 1961, showed 20 of Reddy's prints. According to a letter written in French by Majda Jerman to Krishna Reddy, the opening was broadcast on Yugoslav television and visited by the cultural attaché to the Indian embassy in Belgrade, Ushanalti. At this historical moment of an alignment of nations, art and art events such as exhibitions became central forces in demonstrating to the world how the Cold War divide can be challenged and alliances established at new sites of contact across geopolitical divisions. In Yugoslavia in particular, newly established exhibition formats and exhibition spaces echoed artistic and intellectual impulses, but also aspirations of political sovereignty. The 20 works by Reddy that were exhibited at Malagalleria were the same works that were shown at the Venice exhibition earlier in July that same year. The Venice catalogue was also repurposed for the Ljubljana exhibition, with slight changes in language, from Italian English to Slovenian French. The works included were wave and water lilies, but also other important ones from this period, such as fish, insect, flight, whirlpool, germination, and two forms in one. While all these works are characterized by movement, growth, and flow, and both representation and non-representation, the artist's competence in using the simultaneous color printing method stands out. The late 1950s and early 1960s proved to be a momentous period. Reddy increasingly exhibited in Central European region. In addition to Yugoslavia, he traveled to Vienna on 2 occasions, once in 1960 to participate and to exhibit in connection with a UNESCO conference, and a second time in 1962 to participate in the Sculptor Symposium held at the quarry in St. Margarethen on the southern outskirts of Vienna. Let us focus on some of Reddy's works that were presented in all these exhibitions in order to return to an issue raised at the outset, mainly the artist's adjustment through codes of affiliations. The earliest printed version of 2 forms in 1 dates back to 1954. An almost identical work from the same time, titled Bull and Man, is held in the collection of the Albertina in Vienna. I'm here showing you a version of the print from the collection of Experimenta Kolkata. But the same works are also with the Albertina. While the central form here is drawn and etched into the printing plate as an oval shape, the layers and textures that extend across the entire composition, together with the meandering lines, zigzags, and grid-like structure, gently unsettle its apparent containment, opening the form toward a sense of expansion and spatial relation. 2 forms in 1 is also the title of the sculpture that the artist couple Witebski and Reddy created in the quarry in St. Margarethen. The rudimentary structure of the sculpture, 2 forms in 1, is circular. Considering that the artists began with a single block of stone, it can be assumed that the basic circular form was first carved from the block. As a short film from 1962, which I discovered in the Vienna Film Archive, shows, the couple each worked on one side of the stone, resulting in a slight imbalance in diameters of the circular form. By hollowing out the center, the sculpture attains a palpable sense of transparency while retaining structural stability. So it's stable, but at the same time, it's not quite balanced. The making of 2 forms in 1 required negotiation, possibly compromises, as well as shifts in perspective, and an attentiveness to different points of view. And I would say that's because 2 people working on it, right? The work can therefore be understood as the material outcome of the artist couple's collaborative process and their cumulative experience shaped through their shared labor in the quarry. And here you see stills from the film that I just mentioned, where it is clear that both of them were working on it. The work is assigned to Krishna Reddy only, but I have instructed the owners of the quarry to add Shirley Witebski's name because it is clear that she's part of this work. Okay. So turning now to Bull and Man. The bull signifies masculinity, civilization, but it also embodies fragility and national identity. The bull carries significance in Hindu mythology as well as in the Indus Valley civilization, and it also features prominently in European art history. Right. Bull and Man, 2 forms in 1, both in print and sculptural form, also speaks of processes of splitting and doubling. I think we could go on and add other adjectives to it. I understand the changing titles of this work as a response to the artist's unsettling crisis of dislocation and non-belonging, as well as to the necessity of seeking alternative forms of connection to communities across space and time. Temporal adjustment, in Ranajit Guha's sense of maladjustment, is here in the artist's work challenged as the artist attempts to negotiate multiple temporalities in order to adjust to a heterogeneous present. I consider the artist's turning to the periphery and the margins of mid-20th century modernism, and that's because of the locations they turned to, East Central Europe, Southeast Europe, right, as a way of forging alternative forms of affiliation across time, geography, and cultural tradition. To my mind, this signals a means of negotiating belonging through practices of relation, collaboration, and temporal adjustment. So let me now move on and introduce Ram Kumar, the third artist of today's lecture, to you. Right, this is, you have versions of the younger Ram Kumar in my book. So this is from the 1980s. Ram Kumar was born in northern India. He came to Paris in 1949 and stayed in the French capital for almost 3 years initially. He came back later also. You see him here in this slide in a later photograph taken in Paris in 1985. In Paris, Ram Kumar attended classes with André Lotte and Fernand Léger. He learned French. He was a passionate writer, which he used in Paris to write and translate for various institutions such as UNESCO and newspapers such as the Hindustan Times. In Paris, partly through his literary output, Kumar became associated with the French Communist Party, not unlike Shakir Ali, who traveled to attend the first World Youth Festival in Prague in 1947, we remember. Kumar journeyed to Central Europe on several occasions in the frame of the peace movement. In August 1948, he traveled to Warsaw for the World Congress of Intellectuals for Peace, and in 1950 he was in Prague for a similar event. This record suggests that he was one of the many attendees whom historian Rachel Leoff described as young enthusiasts conference hopping from one event to the other. His literary activities, along with his connection to the French Communist Party, brought him into contact with writers and artists. Louis Aragon, Paul Éluard, Pablo Neruda, Jorge Amado, and Rufino Tamayo are frequently named in writings about Ram Kumar. Through both his writing and his artistic practice, Kumar participated in discourses that engaged with vectors of post-war humanism and existentialism. The well-known Hindi writer Nirmal Verma, Ram Kumar's brother, has written about Kumar's concern for the human condition, which, as he writes, Kumar explored through his voyage into communism, Europe, the mid-century existential ferment. This is how I found in archival boxes such as these traces of Ram Kumar's journey to Prague. And you see here, you have to become inventive when you go to such archives because the names are often written differently, right? Here they're written in a Czech version, kind of, so, you know, it took me quite some time to learn how to find these artists in the archives, but they're there. So some of the artist's concerns are reflected in his paintings, concerns such as existentialism, right, from this, in these paintings from this period. These works are mostly figurative, with either landscapes that are constructed of geometric shapes or cityscapes built of dense architectural forms in which mostly lonely figures or groups of figures appear lost and alienated. In works such as Dream and The City, the individual figure is pushed to the edge of the picture from where he looks at the viewer with a worried or empty gaze. In a work such as Cette, Town, the desperate situation and existential crisis of the individual is reinformed through the inclusion of a naked female figure separately. And you see the work here to the left, Cette, Town. Generally, large figures occupy the picture's surface so that the landscape or the space behind the figure is often reduced to unidentifiable planes. Kumar's painterly depiction of the oppressed and the poor urban working class surely attracted attention in the communist Eastern Bloc countries, where he was soon invited to hold exhibitions. His active involvement in various communist-led forums suggests that his visual language at the time was inspired by a recognizable visual representation that these mega events promoted. The works on view in an exhibition that took place in Prague in July in 1955 were clearly informed by this concern. Held at the small exhibition hall at Slovanský Ostrov, an island on Prague's Vltava River with an impressive park, Kumar exhibited 15 oil paintings and 25 watercolors. These paintings were tragically lost, so I can't show you any of these. They really were destroyed, lost first and then destroyed. So we know that they were exhibited. In a review about this exhibition from July 28, 1955, the artist is quoted as having spoken about the message of peace in his art and his intention to address the economic contradiction in his country in realistic ways. In the newspaper article, Kumar speaks further about the financially difficult situation for artists in India, with few buyers willing to invest in Indian art. Ram Kumar, the article reports, has already visited Czechoslovakia 3 times and has expressed a serious interest in artists such as Ludvík Kuba, Antonín Slavíček, or Wojciech Sedlacek. During the current trip, it goes on to say in this article, Kumar had many meetings with artists and attended friendly debates for creative workshops. In the newspaper article, one work indicated as a drawing is reproduced, and you see it here to the left. In it, we see 2 large female figures facing each other but gazing upwards. Barefoot and dressed in skirts that reach just below the knee, their attire suggests a European style of clothing. The upper bodies are covered with cloaks or shawls, which are also used to cover the head, a reference to Indian clothing. The 2 figures are placed in a landscape that is reminiscent of an Indian miniature painting, particularly due to the circular framing with plants or trees in the upper parts. I don't know if you see that, but the way this painting ends on the top part, this is very reminiscent of Indian-style miniature painting. It's clearly a reference to that. The partial view of the building in the background on the right cannot be assigned any geographical origin. In an assessment of Kumar's early work, art critic Richard Bartholomew speaks of marionette-like figures suspended before the next act, which convey a sense of arrested animation, so something frozen in time, this art critic speaks of, right? What is interesting to note in Kumar's early work, such as the one depicted along with the newspaper article, is how he connects and mingles different landscapes and cultural codes to articulate the threatening isolation and suffering of humans. The visual concept creatively responds to the diverse cultural and political contexts the artist encountered and engaged with. I see this, therefore, connected to his vision of modernism, which, as a consequence of his extensive exposure through his migration, mobility, was not informed by one single place and ideology, but instead by connections that he was able to visually establish between different places and different ideological settings. Through Kumar's exposure to and active involvement with formations of post-war modernism and communism in Paris, but also in places such as Prague, Budapest, and Warsaw, he gained access to a world that was rich with possibilities. Consequently, he was able to establish connections between geographies and art movements in an unprecedented way. In this sense, the suspensions between acts of arrested animation of these marionette-like figures, to which Bartholomew, the art critic from India, refers, gains significance apropos their relationship to pictorial spaces. The marginalized figure, or the marginalized figures in the plural, either pushed to the edge of the painting or squeezed in so that they barely fit the surface or frame of the painting, represent the collective conflicts and struggles experienced by the artist himself, right? It's something that he very closely relates to. Voyaging into communism thus came with rich experiences of inhabiting the time of the present, instead of being confined to what Dipesh Chakravarti has called the waiting room of history. Let me conclude. Migration and affiliations constitute productive conditions that enable new solidarities and artistic identities to form across geographies, across nationalities, and across ideologies. Through codes of affiliation, artists were able to locate themselves within a shared historical moment. Affiliation-based modernism thus signifies belonging, meaning, and historical agency produced through networks of connection, rather than through nation, style, or origin. It becomes obsolete. Affiliation here refers to a contingent form of belonging, defined less by origins than by the global projects to which one chooses to attach oneself. Read through Ranajit Guha, modernism, understood in terms of codes of affiliation, allows for a reconceptualization of modern times as uneven, discontinuous, and relational, rather than as a linear progression toward national or developmental endpoints. Last but not least, as I have demonstrated here tonight, I hope, this perspective also requires us to redefine, or perhaps rather to rediscover, as historian Karl Schlögl has urged, the changing geographic and cultural dynamics that shape Central Europe or Mitteleuropa, a term that may be better equipped to articulate these concerns, Mitteleuropa being the German term for Central Europe. The fact that these South Asian artists have turned to these regions ultimately compels us to rethink the geographies of modernism themselves as temporal as well as spatial formations, spaces in which migrant subjects negotiate a charged present shaped by anticipation and projection, recalling Andreas Huyssen's call to reconfigure modernism's spatial imaginaries. Thank you for your attention.